We're coming on the air right now with breaking news.
We begin with that breaking news. A state of emergency in California.
A deadly mass shooting.
And after a bizarre rampage turned deadly on Burke Street.
I saw people running and screaming.
All sit with me as the bomb charged over
The year was 1809, and everything in Europe was centered around one personality. Now, to be sure, in North America, we had our own thing going on. We were trying to figure out this whole America thing. But in Europe, everything was dominated by this young general, a guy who became a general at the age of 24. He was, some say, a military genius, and the success that he had was amazing as France began to expand its borders and its territories from battle after battle. This, you may not recognize him in this picture, but you probably do in this one. Napoleon was dominating the headlines. And there were these battles were actually gigantic, some of the largest that the world had ever seen. There was one battle on the Danube River that in one battle, 80,000 people died. Not fought, died. And he began to expand not only across Europe, but into the colonies that some of these European countries had expanded to. He began to spread into those. Dana and I had the opportunity to be in Egypt this past fall. And while we were there on a tour to see the Sphinx, the Egyptian tour guide told us that one of the primary theories about the Sphinx's nose is they blame Napoleon. He said that when he came, he turned his soldiers loose and they had target practice on the nose of the Sphinx. And that's why it's gone now. I have no idea if that's what happened or not, but I will tell you this, in 1809, this guy was a big deal. He had been for 6 or 7 years, and he's going to be a big deal for another 5 or 6. And then, of course, they don't know this in 1809. All the attention in Europe is on this guy. They don't know that Waterloo is coming. They don't know that how the things are going to turn out. But this is the name. This is everything else that happens in 1809, that no one gave any attention to it, especially in Europe. And the Christmas story is like that. The Christmas story is dominated by a single character, and his name is Caesar Augustus. His real name was Octavian. He was actually the stepson of Julius Caesar, and Julius Caesar made him his successor and also gave him all of his resources. Now, there was some fighting for him to finally take control, but Caesar Augustus actually ends up becoming one of the strongest and most powerful Caesars of all the Caesars. He reigned for a very long time and expanded the borders of the Roman Empire as much as anyone, probably more than anyone else. And he has figured out a way how to dominate people and to dominate countries like no other. And so when he says we're going to have a census, I mean, people responded as far away as Palestine. Can you imagine all the way from Rome to Palestine, even in little podunk cities, or even not even just towns like Nazareth. Nazareth is a one-horse town. Or in Texas, it would be a one Dairy Queen town. I mean, it's a little bitty place, but even there, the influence of Caesar Augustus and this issuing of a decree is having influence what's going on there. And it's not about people. It's not about how many people are in the Roman Empire. Caesar Augustus doesn't care about that. It's all about taxes. It's all about money. And so what I want to do is I want to walk through kind of slow the Luke account of the Christmas story, and kind of I have a desire. What I want to do is, I know that most of our experience in Christmas is formed really more by Hallmark than it is by Luke. And so I want to show you kind of some things that are there and see if it can't open your eyes up to some of the stuff that's really there. Nothing wrong with Hallmark. And if some of y'all are like, oh, I got to have Hallmark, then okay, it's okay. It'll be all right. As long as Jesus is born, your story's acceptable. But this is what Luke says. In those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census would be taken of the entire Roman world. Very important little parenthetical statement. This was the first census that took place while Quirinius was governor of Syria, and everyone went to his own town to register. That's important because actually the dating of Christ, his birth, is a little bit subject to some controversy. We're pretty sure now that we understand what happened, but it wasn't always this way. And around the year 525 AD, there was a pope named Pope John I. And he wanted to start the calendar and make it a Christian calendar rather than a Roman calendar. The old Roman calendar was designated by the letters after the date of AUC, capital AUC, was the Roman calendar. And there were all kinds of flaws in it, and that it didn't take into consideration some lunar considerations and other things. So the Christian calendar in 525, this pope said, let's start it all over, and I want AD 1. I want AD 1 to be the birth of Christ. We're going to start it on the birth of Jesus. Well, everybody got all fired up, and he hired this guy named Dionysius. Dionysius was a monk, and he was put in charge of figuring out, well, what year is 1 AD? So he began to do his work, and he tried to figure it all out. We know now he missed. It's like an oops. Jesus was probably born around late 5 BC or early 4 BC. We know this because of some extra biblical resources that we have now in order to be able to do the dating more accurately than they had access to in 525. And so it's one of those things that you kind of look at it and you say, oh, this is just a thought. You know those guys that come out every once in a while and they say, Jesus is coming back on this date. This is the number God gave me. That number's wrong. I mean, if he's got the right number, it would have happened 4 years earlier, because certainly God knew when his son was born. He wasn't waiting for this, right? So that's just one more reason. I warn y'all all the time. Don't pay any attention to those people who are always giving you dates and telling you this is the end of the world, the sky is falling. That may happen, but nobody's going to know when. So this happened when Quirinius was the governor of Syria. So Joseph also went up from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to Bethlehem, the town of David, because he belonged to the house and the line of David. Now, this is important because of some prophetic things that have been said about the coming Messiah. Even as early as 1,000 years before, we knew that it was going to be in the line of David. And other prophets came along, like Micah, that said that he would be born in the town of David. But more important, what this does is this tells us a little bit about Jesus' early life, in that Joseph does not live in his hometown. Now, that doesn't mean really anything to us. I mean, there's very few of us in the room probably that are born and raised right here in the Silicon Valley, and lots of us have come in afterwards. But in the first century, if for a Palestinian Jew, you never sold your land unless you had to, and the only reason you would have to is because you couldn't pay taxes. So Joseph doesn't live in Bethlehem, his hometown, anymore. He lives in Nazareth because he, probably not him, but one of his father, great-grandfather, or great-great-grandfather, somewhere down the line, someone didn't have enough money. Joseph is poor. He's not a landowner. And so this gives us some insight into it in terms of what's going on. He goes to Bethlehem to register with Mary, who was pledged to be married to him and was expecting a child. Now, let's talk about this a little bit first. The first one is that he says he was pledged to be married, but in Matthew's account of the Christmas story, it says that after the angel came and talked to Joseph, Joseph took Mary as his wife. Are they married or are they pledged? Well, kind of both. From Matthew's perspective, whenever the wife moves in with the man, whenever they begin to reside in the same house, he considered that a marriage. But in Luke's perspective, it's not considered a marriage until the wedding is consummated, and they have not done that yet. And so Luke considers them as pledged. They actually look at the same event. It's not a contradiction. It's just understanding the cultural differences of the first century and how the Jews interpreted how the engagement process went. If you were engaged, you were as good as married. You just didn't get the benefits, if you know what I'm saying. So they went ahead and became together. And this is what we learn here. She is expecting a child. I love the way the old King James Version said it. She was great with child. I just love that phrase. But there's another question you got to ask. What's she doing taking a trip when she is great with child? What in the world? Joseph doesn't have to take Mary with him. It's not the requirement of the census. The head of the family was all that was required in these censuses. So why is he taking her? Now, you can kind of think about this, but my best explanation, and again, this is just my own interpretation of what I read, but my best explanation is she's safer with him than being left behind. Even though the trip, when she's in her 9th month of pregnancy, is going to put her at great danger, she would be in greater danger if she were left behind. Now that tells us some things about how they're experiencing the first months of their marriage. She is, and they are, completely rejected by both families. There is no help. If he were to leave her there in Nazareth, the child would be born to a 14-year-old to 16-year-old little girl, basically, and she would have no one there to help her. Plus, who knows how that small town might react once they see a child that they know was conceived out of wedlock. Who knows what they would do with that child, or even the mother. And so he takes Mary with him because she's safer there, even though it's a very difficult journey. The time came, while they were there, the time came for the baby to be born, and she gave birth to her firstborn, a son. And she did what all mothers do even today. She wrapped that child in cloths and placed them, now this is where it gets different, in a manger. When you read that word manger, read feeding trough. That's what that word is in the Greek. It's where the animals fed. And what are they doing with the animals? Now, I know it goes on to say because there was no room for them in the inn, but I want to suggest to you, just because of what I know of some of the words that are used here, this word for room is not the word that's normally used for an inn or a hotel in our language. If you're looking for that word, Luke uses it in Luke chapter 10 when the Good Samaritan comes along and picks up the beat up dude and takes him to an inn and places him in that inn. He uses a different word, the common word in Greek for an inn. This is another word. It's the word for extra room. It'd be just an extra room in the house. It's my guess, okay? It's my guess, because no one really knows, that they weren't trying to, there's no innkeeper. I know we hate to lose the dude because he's a good villain and we like, in Hallmark, we like drawing ugly pictures of him, but there's probably not an innkeeper. There's probably just a home where they had made arrangements to stay and they don't have any room left. Now, I've always thought, because there was no room in the inn, that Joseph just kind of did vacations like me. We'll find something when we get there. And when he got there, there was no room. I think it's probably more likely that he actually made arrangements. It's very possible he made arrangements to come to Bethlehem. But it's a hard journey. And normally in Jesus' day, from what I've read, that it would have taken, to go from Nazareth to Bethlehem, it would have taken a 4 days walk. But with a woman in her 9th month of pregnancy, it probably took twice that, 8 days, maybe 10. And they're late getting there. They're late showing up. And even though he might have made arrangements, that room has long been given away because he didn't show up when they expected him to show up. And so not only are they rejected as a couple and poor, now they end up late to the party in terms of getting there in time. And so there's nothing left other than this room, this extra room where the animals are. Now we know it's where the animals are because the manger, the feeding trough is in there. So now understand the construction of homes in Jesus' day would have been one perimeter, one large perimeter with some divisions inside the perimeter that allowed for a guest, that allowed for family, and that allowed for animals. The animals might be under the same roof with just some kind of division, small fence or something to keep the animals from getting up and walking on you and other things in the middle of the night. But they would have been under the same, it could have been in a carved out cave in the side of the hillside or something. It could have been that. There was certainly that. I don't know. But I do know that when they came to the place where arrangements had been made, if they had been made, there was no room left in that extra room. Families had already taken that. And so they slept with the animals. I mean, you can hardly paint a more poverty-stricken story. I mean, it's almost like God is going out of his way. Don't you think God could figure out and get the room? By the way, the word for room, when Jesus is preparing for the Last Supper, right before he's arrested and betrayed, the word is for room. When he sends the disciples into Jerusalem and they ask, where is the room that you have provided us so that we can have the Last Supper together or Passover meal together? And so that's that room. That's why I think it's just an extra room that would have been there inside of the confines of a larger area. So that's the kind of the way. Now, if you're sitting there going, man, Steve, you're jacking up my whole, nativity scene here going, and that's okay. I've got them in my house. I love them. I set them up every year, and I'm not trying to mess up Hallmark's sales of anything here. I just want you to understand that what really happened is Jesus was born into a situation where God was going to great lengths to be able to say, even though everything seems completely out of control, I've got a plan and I'm working it. And anybody can be included in this plan. It's kind of like 1809 when you take a look at what's going on. Nobody paid any attention to anyone who was born. But that particular year, 1809, was an amazing year for births. William Gladstone was born in 1809. He went on to become one of England's greatest statesmen. And then Alfred Tennyson was also born in that year. And he went on to become one of England's greatest poets. On the North American continent, Oliver Wendell Holmes, one of our great poets, was born. And then one of our darkest authors, Edgar Allan Poe, was also born in 1809. And then to an obscure physician in the Boston area, there was a guy named Charles Robert Darwin that was born to a young couple. Back in France, there was this guy who couldn't see. His vision was impaired, and he invented Braille. He was born in 1809, and I'd be a horrible Texan if I didn't also mention William Travis, the hero of the Alamo, who said, give us liberty or give us death. I mean, this dude, he was born in 1809, and then in this little podunk Kentucky town, Abraham Lincoln was also born, all in 1809. In a year where the European mindset was nothing's really happening here except for Napoleon. There was all kinds of things happening. And what I want to suggest to you is that in a year when everyone was thinking that Caesar Augustus was determining the future of the world, that God was at work. Listen, men and women, one of the things that comes out of the Christmas story is I don't know where you are. I don't know what you're wrestling with. I don't know what kind of challenges are in front of you at the end of 18 and as we begin the 2019 year. But however out of control and random it seems, God is still there. And he is not confused. And his plans for you are for good and not for evil. There is great hope in the message and the event of Christmas, especially when you can understand the why behind the what. In Galatians chapter 4, we're told some of the insight about why God would move and allow his son to be born in such a way. Watch this. But when the right time came, that word for right time that we translate there is actually full term. It was a term that was used for a woman who was pregnant when the baby's about to come out. It's when term is full. When God looked at the expanse of history, he said, right there, right at that exact time, that's when my son is going to be born. It seems like a bad plan. Can we admit that? You want to put your son under the power of a Roman boot? And they're the cruelest people you can imagine. They invent ways to make people hurt for long periods of time. But God says, that's exactly when I want my son to be born. Because it's at that time, for the first time in history, there was an opportunity to travel from country to country because of the road system that the Roman government had put in place. You could actually travel all around the known world without threat of entering into new governments because the Roman peace was enforced on all people. And when you went there was a common language that was enforced upon every single country that this is how you will do your education and this is how you will do all of your business operations. It was Greek language. For the first time in history, you could take a message from a little town in Bethlehem and take it all the way to Rome. And that would be, compared to the earlier times in history, easy to do. At just the right time. As soon as he could bring it about, Jesus was born. And God sent his son, born of a woman, subject to the law, not just the Mosaic law of the Jews, but also the laws of nature. Listen, folks, God has been silent for 400 years to his people Israel, and he breaks the silence with a child's cry. With a baby crying out because that baby is hungry or needs changing. Yes, Jesus did those things. God sent him to buy freedom for us who were slaves. He didn't set up another rule system for behavioral management. He wanted to buy us freedom and offer that freedom to any who would embrace it by faith. He calls that system grace. That freedom that is offered freely to anyone who would believe. This grace that flows out of a kind heart from a good God. Why would he do these things? So that he could adopt us as his very own children. There's a plan behind the scenes, and it's not just so Hallmark has some things to draw and sell. He comes at just the right time to purchase freedom so that we can be his children. Man, obviously you've made some arrangements in your life so that you bring Christ into the Christmas season. You're here. You're a part of what's going on over at the South Hills campus or in the theater or even at Sunnyvale. You've made some arrangements, but you could miss the why. The great offer, the great gift that at just the perfect time, God purchased freedom for us. And when we embrace it by faith, we are adopted as his kids. No matter how crazy your life is, no matter how wild and out of control things might be. I don't know how many friends you got on Facebook, and I don't know how many likes you got on your last tweet. But I can tell you this, God is aware of you. He knows you intimately, and he loves you unconditionally, and he longs for you to be in his family. Don't miss the why of Christmas. Let's pray. Thank you, Father, for such a clear demonstration of your love for us. Thank you for the way that you went out of your way so that each of us could not say, well, it's not for me. God, you picked some of the lowest common denominators so that we can all relate to Christ's birth. And we love this story. We love the sentimental value of it. We love the expression of love that you've given to us. But God, may we not miss the reason behind the expression. That you've purchased freedom for us and you offer it to all who would receive it by faith. and that you desire everyone, every person. You desire none to perish, but all to be adopted as your sons and your daughters. May it be so of everyone who hears my voice. Thank you for loving us this way. In Jesus' name, amen.